I only wanted a quiet birthday dinner. But the universe booked me a front row seat to my own humiliation. I saw them before they saw me. My son, his wife, and their rich friends. When she pointed at me and laughed about my dress, I didn't flinch. I smiled because I knew something they didn't. They were laughing inside my restaurant. I wasn't even supposed to be there. The plan was simple. Stay home, make tea, forget the calendar. But silence can be cruel on birthdays. It sits beside you and reminds you of everyone who forgot. So I did something reckless. I put on the beige dress, the one that never asks for attention, and told myself I was only going out for soup. The streets were wet, shining like old mirrors. The river smelled like rain and memory. I walked slower than I needed to, because loneliness always waits at the destination. When I reached the restaurant, the doorman smiled politely, the kind of smile that says, "You don't belong here, but I'll let you in." I stepped inside, and the laughter hit me, sharp, familiar, expensive. My son's voice, softer than I remembered. My daughter-in-law's laugh, louder than ever, and her words cut through the air like a knife dipped in honey. That woman's dress, it looks like she wandered in from a thrift store. The table erupted. My son lowered his head and said nothing. Gisidastium. I stood there, holding my purse like a shield, each heartbeat louder than the piano. I could have cried, could have turned around and walked out, but I smiled instead. Not because it didn't hurt, but because power doesn't always roar. Sometimes it waits in silence. I turned away, asked the waiter for a table. He looked at me, and his expression softened with recognition. "Welcome back, madam," he said quietly. "Your private table is ready." And just like that, the air changed. People who never noticed me before suddenly forgot how to laugh. He led me to my usual corner by the river window. Candles floated in the glass like tiny suns. I sat down, pretending not to notice. The silence that followed me across the room. My name is Grace Bennett. I'm 58. I raised my son alone after his father died when the boy was 10. I used to wake at 4 a.m. to bake bread in a small bakery and told myself one truth. If I worked hard enough, he would never know hunger. When he got married, I thought maybe I could finally rest. But after she came into our lives, I became invisible. She was young, beautiful, ambitious, and I was the shadow. She wanted erased. My calls went unanswered, my visits unwelcome, birthdays forgotten, until tonight, until that laughter. Softly. The waiter brought my tea, steam curling like memory. He placed a small candle on the table. He didn't ask if it was my birthday. Some people just know. "Would you like your usual, madam?" he asked. "Yes," I said softly. "Just the soup." He smiled and walked away. Kindness can sound like music when the world forgets your name. The soup was warm and delicate. The same recipe I used to make when my son was small. Back then, he would dip his spoon into the bowl and say, "It tastes like home, Mom." Tonight, the same scent carried through the air, ginger, carrot, and comfort. And it reminded me that home is a feeling, not a place. But sometimes, the people you love most turn it into a museum of ghosts. I watched him from across the room, not out of bitterness, but curiosity. The way he smiled now was different, practiced, shallow, polite. It was the smile of someone who had learned how to survive in rooms that measure your worth by your shoes. His wife whispered something in his ear. He nodded quickly, like a servant trying to please his queen. There was a time he used to look at me that way, except his smile then was real. I sipped my tea, and memory poured with it. I remembered his first job interview. He was nervous, his only suit borrowed from a friend. I had stayed up the night before, fixing the loose button, hand stitching it with thread I bought for 20 cents. He got the job, came home crying with joy, hugged me so tightly I couldn't breathe. That was the last day. He said thank you without hesitation. After he met her, things changed slowly, like light fading at dusk. She didn't do anything wrong. Not at first. She was sweet, polite, even shy. But when she realized I didn't fit her world, she began to rearrange it. My son started talking differently, dressing differently, thinking differently. They moved to the city, and I stayed behind, telling myself this was what good mothers do. Let go. But letting go and being forgotten are not the same thing. Letting go is love. Being forgotten is grief that never gets a funeral. The waiter returned quietly. "Madam, the manager will be with you shortly," he said. I nodded, thanked him. The staff here always treated me with respect. They didn't see an old woman. They saw the name on the papers, but still, I preferred the silence of anonymity. Power, to me, was never about being seen. It was about knowing you could speak, but choosing not to. At the other table, laughter rose again. It was louder now, thinner, more desperate. The sound of people performing happiness. She was showing off, telling a story about their new vacation house. I heard my son say, "We're lucky," and I smiled softly. Luck is a word the lazy use to explain other people's effort. I took another sip of tea, and for the first time that night, I allowed myself to feel sad. Not for me, but for him. He had traded love for approval, warmth for prestige. I had done the same once, many years ago, when I married his father. Perhaps that's what life is. A circle of choices we think are new, but have always been the same. The manager appeared at my table. "Good evening, Mrs. Bennett," he said with quiet formality. "It's a pleasure to have you with us again." I smiled. "You always make this place feel like home," I replied. He leaned slightly, lowering his voice. "Would you like me to acknowledge you, or keep your presence private?" "Private," I said, "for now." He nodded. Of course. Would you like to order dessert later? Maybe, I said, depending on how the evening goes. We both smiled. Two people sharing a secret too elegant to name. He stepped away, and I caught the faint reflection of my son in the glass. He was watching the manager walk back toward their table. I could see his confusion. When the manager leaned down and spoke to him, my son's brow furrowed slightly. His wife whispered, annoyed. I didn't need to hear their words to understand the rhythm of entitlement. Soon after, the waiter returned to me with quiet confidence. It's done, he said. They've been informed that tonight's dinner is on the house. I nodded, watching the subtle storm form across the room. My daughter-in-law's face stiffened. My son's eyes darted around, searching for an explanation. I looked away, pretending to read the menu I knew by heart. When you've lived long enough, you learn that revenge isn't always loud. Sometimes it's polite. Sometimes it wears pearls and says, enjoy your meal. I finished the last sip of my soup and watched a candle melt down to its base. The wax spilled like years, quietly, inevitably, beautifully. I had spent most of my life trying to prove my worth in other people's stories, but tonight, for the first time, I was simply living mine. Across the room, their conversation had died. My son was frowning. His wife whispered sharply, why are you acting weird? He looked toward the corner, toward me. For a brief moment, our eyes met. He froze. Recognition flickered behind his shock. He mouthed a word I hadn't heard in years. Mom. He stood up slowly, like a man walking through a dream. He wasn't sure he wanted to finish. His friends turned their heads. She touched his arm, whispering, where are you going? But he didn't answer. He was already moving toward me. I kept my gaze on the river outside, watching the reflection of streetlights dance across the glass. The sound of his footsteps was enough to tell me the moment had come, the moment every mother secretly imagines when silence breaks and pride remembers where it came from. He stopped beside my table, voice trembling just slightly. Hi, Mom. I turned to him and smiled, the way only mothers can smile, soft, forgiving, infinite. Hello, sweetheart. He looked around, unsure how to stand, how to speak. You own this place? I nodded. For a while now. His face went pale. Why didn't you tell me? I set my teacup down gently, because you never asked. He swallowed hard, guilt flashing behind his eyes. I'm sorry. I know, I said, and I'm not angry. He hesitated, then whispered, she didn't mean it. I smiled again. She meant it. She just didn't expect consequences. He looked down. We forgot your birthday. Yes, I said softly. You did. Silence lingered between us, not the cold kind, but the heavy, healing kind. I placed my hand over his. Son, birthdays don't matter, but respect does. And when you lose that, everything else fades. Tita Sang Stimlausen, his eyes watered. And for a moment, I saw the little boy who once wrote me Mother's Day cards with uneven letters. He nodded, speechless. I squeezed his hand. Go home, sweetheart. Take care of her. Learn. Life has a way of repeating lessons until we understand them. He nodded again, whispered, Happy birthday, Mom, and walked back to the table. 2 days later, I stood at their doorstep, the same house I'd visited years ago, back when I was still welcome. It looked the same, perfect, elegant, distant. I held a small box of lemon tarts in my hands, tied with a golden ribbon. It wasn't a peace offering. It was a bridge. Fabit, my son opened the door. He looked nervous. Come in, Mom, he said softly. The smell of coffee lingered in the air. I stepped inside and felt the weight of memories, the framed wedding photo, the flowers on the table, the faint sound of a piano playing from another room. It was beautiful, but cold, like a museum where happiness was something to be displayed, not lived. She appeared at the end of the hallway, my daughter-in-law. Her eyes were red, her shoulders stiff. Grace, she said quietly. It was the first time she'd called me by my name instead of your mother. I smiled gently. Hello, dear. The three of us sat together for the first time in years. The silence between us was sharp, but it wasn't hostile anymore. It was hesitant, like a wound learning how to close. She took a deep breath and said, I owe you an apology. That night at the restaurant, I said awful things. I was angry, but not at you. Then who were you angry at? I asked. Her eyes filled with tears. My mother, she whispered. She left when I was 10. When I saw you and your son, I hated it. I wanted to destroy it before it reminded me what I'd lost. The room fell silent. My son looked down, ashamed. Pain doesn't always excuse cruelty, but it explains its shape. I reached across the table and touched her hand. You can't heal by hurting others, I said softly. But now, you can choose differently. She nodded, tears falling freely. I don't know how to fix it, she said. Start with honesty, I replied. And tea. Tea fixes most things. For the first time, she laughed. A real laugh. Small, but genuine. My son smiled. The tension in his shoulders finally melted. We spent the morning talking, not about the restaurant, not about the insults, but about life, about small things, her job, his work, the silly arguments that make up a marriage. And slowly, we began to sound like family again. Not perfect, not polished, but human. Divitin, at one point, she said, I didn't know you owned that restaurant. Everyone talks about it like it's the best in town. It's just a place, I said. A place where people eat. And remember, they're alive. The food is simple, but kindness is the secret ingredient. You're different from what I expected, she said. So are you, I replied. I think that's how people surprise each other, when they finally stop pretending. Tut. My son disappeared into the kitchen and came back holding a small envelope. I wanted to give you something, he said. Inside was a photo. Me and him, years ago, in the bakery. Flour on our faces, laughter frozen in time. We want you to move in with us, he said. There's a guest room upstairs. We'd love to have you close. I looked at him, then at her. For a moment, I almost said yes. But then, I looked out the window at the sunlight spilling over the garden and felt peace. That's sweet, I said. But no, I think I finally like where I am. I'll visit, though, often. He nodded, understanding without argument. She stood up, walked over, and hugged me. It was awkward at first, then real. I'm sorry, she whispered. I know, I said. Now make sure you never have to say it again. We spent the rest of the afternoon cooking together. Simple things: soup, salad, lemon tart. The kind of meal that doesn't need luxury to feel special. Can I visit your restaurant sometime? She asked. You'd better, I said. I need someone to test the new dessert. As the sun began to set, I stepped out onto their porch. My son walked me to the car. I never realized how much you carried alone, he said. You weren't supposed to, I replied. That's what parents do. But someday, when you're older, you'll understand the weight and the joy of it. He nodded. I love you, Mom. I smiled. I know. I never doubted that. Not even when you did. He hugged me once more, and I drove away. The road was quiet. The world outside looked the same. But everything inside me had changed. The pain was still there, but it had softened. Like an old scar, you stop hiding. When I reached home, I placed the photo he'd given me on the mantel, beside the candle. I light for my husband every night. The flame flickered, reflecting both faces, past and present, sorrow and peace. I whispered, we did it. We found our way back. It's been 3 months since that night. The restaurant still glows each evening. Warm lights in the windows, laughter floating through the glass, like music. I still sit at my corner table sometimes, the one by the river, where the candles shimmer like memories. But the laughter doesn't hurt anymore. Now, when I hear it, I smile. Because laughter means people are healing, and maybe in some small way, I helped them do that. My son visits every Sunday. He helps with the books, sometimes brings flowers. His wife comes too. She bakes now. Her first lemon tart was a disaster, but the second tasted like forgiveness. They call me more often than I ever expected, and every time the phone rings, I am reminded that distance doesn't destroy love. Silence does. The restaurant has grown busier. We added a new section on the menu. Grace's soup. People ask for it, even when they don't know my story. Maybe that's how love works. It travels quietly, hidden in flavor, memory, and kindness. One evening, as I was leaving, the manager stopped me at the door. "There's a journalist who wants to interview you," he said. "She's writing a piece about women entrepreneurs." "Tell her I'm not an entrepreneur," I said. "I'm just a woman who refused to stay invisible." But that night, when I came home, I thought about the title she might have given me. Maybe something like Riches and Lies, because that's what life is made of. The riches we earn and the lies we believe along the way. I used to believe that money could bring respect, that silence meant strength, that endurance was love. But I was wrong. Respect is not something you buy, it's something you keep by standing tall. Silence is not strength unless it's chosen, not imposed. And endurance is not love unless it makes both hearts grow. Sometimes the richest people in the world are the ones who've lost everything but their dignity. I think about that a lot these days when I walk through the restaurant, when I lock the doors at night, when I watch the city lights, reflecting on the river. People often ask what success feels like. I tell them it feels like peace, the kind that doesn't need witnesses. Last week, a woman came into the restaurant alone. She sat at my corner table, ordered soup and tea, and said almost nothing. When she left, she whispered to the waiter, "Please tell the owner, this place feels like home." He told me later, and I smiled, because that's all I ever wanted, to build something that feels like home, even for those who've forgotten what that word means. Tonight, I light a candle by my husband's photo, and beside it, the picture of me and my son in the bakery. The two flames flicker side by side, past and present, loss and peace, pain and love. The world outside is still loud, still unfair, still full of people, pretending to be more than they are. But I've stopped chasing their approval. Now, I just live quietly, kindly, completely. And if you ever walk by my restaurant and see an older woman sitting alone by the river window, smiling at the night, don't pity her. She's not lonely. She's free.